and the kinds of people that manage the electoral process. They know what they want, and that's why they've been working hard on BVAS and all of these things that will counteract the tendencies that we have seen and minimize them. But that's not all. INEC doesn't have the final say in a manner of speaking. So we hope that if INEC would be allowed to do its work the way things are shaping up, we just might. Now in Kenya the last time, we reached an unprecedented height where 4 members of the Electoral and Boundary Commission decided to have a minority report, and they walked out and they said, no, we cannot do this. Now that's democratic, comrade, I would think. Yeah, because the guys are able to do that. Now, how do you appoint people into INEC going forward, that is? In South Africa, I have seen, a model that I think, is highly recommended. In South Africa, they call for nominations, for people who would go to the Electoral Commission. And nominations are made and the names are published, and if 7-day notice, if you have any reason why they shouldn't serve on that commission, you say so, or forever you hold your peace. Now, then there's a shortlisting, and that shortlisting is done by a team that is not appointed by government. It's mostly non-state actors. They come there, they shortlist. And the people, it's a very transparent process. They go there, they are interviewed, they ask questions, well, so. And then finally, names are forwarded, and these names, again, are published if you have any reason why they shouldn't serve and so on. That's a very transparent process. And perhaps it's the legitimization of the composition of that electoral commission, that has, in South Africa, people don't deal with the kinds of issues that we deal with. I'm sure that if INEC becomes more legitimate than it is now, and we all see it as a credible umpire, many of these issues would find, and so on. But that can only happen if we develop, and get to the point of our common holding, where we now have a sense of, common things. Now that takes me very quickly to the issue of leadership, because it's something that we all like to talk about in Nigeria. You can't talk about issues of problematic elections if you don't address those we expect should have the answers to these problems, i.e. the political gladiators, those who are running for office, those who want to be president, who want to be governor, who want to be and so on, senators and members of the legislative bodies. Now, what is leadership? In a federal setting like Nigeria's, leadership can only be considered in the most inclusive manner, meaning that at the federal level, there will be leadership. At the state level, the sub-national levels, we have leadership also. So you have strong candidates for presidency. You should also have strong candidates for gubernatorial elections and local government elections. And the point about federalism is that every layer of government, its own leader. So you can have 774 local government chairmen that don't have to act the same way. 12 of them can be, outliers in terms of, their development quotients and the things they're able to do. You can have 36 state governors. I mean, the ones that perform would be the ones that perform. The non-performing ones would also be seen. So it's that diversity, that makes it. But, in our country, the focus all the time is on the president and the presidency. So even when things have gone wrong in the states, we blame the presidency. Don't you see? And I'm told that, state governors themselves like this, because there is a diversion of, focus. And they also like to encourage the impression, that when things go wrong, they only go wrong because the president is not doing what he should do. If you take the whole point about fiscal federalism, for instance, many states have a lot of money they get via IGR, but the focus remains what comes from Abuja. And once that focus is there, people take attention away from how much you actually get. But many state governments get a lot of money. And this is for non-state actors, especially in the civil society. I find it scandalous, that civil society is more active at the federal level than it is at the state and local government levels in terms of holding governments to account. There are many things the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria cannot do today just because the focus on the federal government is very, very huge. But many state governors have fiefdoms. They have private empires. The legislatures even in those states don't exist. So civil society also doesn't quite exist. So one hopes that, when you talk leadership across board, it is leadership of that plural kind, that we're talking about. People need to stand up to be counted in the state as well as the non-state, segments of the things. But the kind of leadership that we want, I would illustrate in terms of Plato's allegory of the cave. You remember I had talked to you about a governor who says, what do the people want? Because many of us are so contemptuous of the people that we want to serve that we take it for granted that the people don't even have a knowledge of what they want. Nothing can be more tragic, to want to lead people that you take for granted. You just simply assume that they don't know, So you have a monopoly of how to lead them because the people themselves have nothing to offer. Now, Plato's allegory of the cave helps to put this in perspective. There are people who have lived in the cave all their lives, and the cave is semi-dark, so all they see are, shadows of people that, the light throws on, and they assume that is a world. It's a fictitious world out there, but, they are here, and they've learned to be blind almost. They don't see anything. That's how they've lived their lives. Until one day, one of them finds the very rare opportunity to go outside. The first is that the rays of the sun would blind him. But once he overcomes that, he sees that all of those shadows they were seeing are real things. It's a real world. My, oh my, we've been living in darkness. He says, when I get back to the cave, I'm going to tell those people, out of the cave, all of you out of the cave, we have found it. In Ibadan, we had a movement, a Pentecostal movement in the early 1980s that was summarized as Motiri. Motiri in Yoruba means, I found it. So many of us, if you want to be blessed, and I fell for that. I also had Motiri sticker in my car, so because, that's how to be blessed. But the guy came back and said, Motiri, all of you, let's go. They looked at him and said, look at this foolish man. What do you want to show us? We are better here. Now, so what does leadership mean? Leadership means, first, that the people find you to be credible. That you are, and earlier today we were talking about the Chinese commandist system, the one that talks about layers of leadership. The one that says, that people should get promoted across those layers on the basis of merit. If you have proven your mettle at a lower level, you can go to the next level, you can go to the next level, and so on. Now, in India, where they have the Panchayati system for local governments, people make progress from the community level, they become distinguished, but our system is so fractured that leaders come from nowhere, no foundation. You know this. Once I had a PRO in my university who aspired to a gubernatorial position in his state. And I thought, something had to be wrong with him. You just don't come from nowhere wanting to be governor. But, my principals said to me, what are you saying? How do people become governors in Nigeria anyway? What proven abilities do they have, to show that, they are like the man who saw the sun, from the cave. And come to think of it, our system would need to address the whole management of the emergence of leaders, how we choose our leaders, who they are. I've seen some of the more aside things in recent times. One is that we should take them for medical examination. I agree. We should take them for medical examination. All those people who aspire to lead us. Now, this is without, I say, look, there are two things, that must inform why we should do so. The first is that the psychosis, the psychology of rulership shows that people that have chronic diseases tend to be very mean leaders. Okay? So if somebody is, sure to die, they lose the whole thing about being human, and they treat all of us like cold-blooded mammals. They are very mean. Now think, not just of the chronic problem, but of a mentally deranged person. Now that can become a problem. But secondly, also, you have a leader who is not so well. A lot of our money will go into medical expenses. That can also be a problem. So when people say, let's try them, let's see, let's subject them. I think it's Professor Patu Tomi who was saying that, the other day, that all of the guys who are candidates for all elections should go for medical tests. I think so. I would even also add that we have a marathon race, to be presided over by Wali, so they can run from, Abuja to Jos, and we see how many of them can take that. But how more irresponsible can those who are going to be leaders of this country be? That today we can talk about elections in the midst of overwhelming insecurity. So there are things that people cannot understand. We are playing the political game. Today, we signal, the beginning of our campaigns, even when life is so nasty, brutish, and short. Nobody is sure that if you leave home in the morning, you'll be able to return today. So one would expect, for instance, that all of our leaders, in addition to the peace accords that we are going around, should be able to get together to say, look, let us address these questions of insecurity. They are very fundamental to the kinds of things that we want to do. And you don't lose advantage. You don't become, a senior prefect if you are the one driving it. But you guys, I think you should think of those things. Getting summits on insecurity. It will be nice in an inter-party forum, where we come to address these kinds of issues. You must partner with the security agencies to do these things. Now, this leadership that we're talking about, you've given them so many names. Some say they are transformation, some say they are transactional, some say they are organic leadership. Some say you have instances of opportunistic leadership. You have those kinds of things. But we are simply saying we are looking for leaders that are patriotic, that are loyal to our country, and that have the capacity, to begin to forge a common good for all of us. Why do we need a common good? You have heard the kinds of things we say on radio. See something, say something. You have heard it. See something, say something. Now, people say, that in other countries, I don't like to use the word better countries, but other countries that, are not like us, it is citizens themselves that are the first port of call for surveillance, for intelligence, and for security. How many times would you see that, one old woman somewhere, in one forlorn place in America, is seeing something, and then she calls 911. There's something going on here, and so on and so on. Or you see strange movements, you let your security agencies know. But think of Nigeria. We all know the robbers in our neighborhoods. We all know them, the robbers in our neighborhoods. We know those who are kidnappers in our neighborhoods. We know the criminals in our midst. I hope we are not diverted. Let's focus attention here. So we are people who are coming out of the cave. Okay? So we should get out of the cave. Okay? So. In Nigeria, if you see something and you say something, you know what your neighbors immediately say? They say, that's a bad man. You know, you are the one that will go to the police to say, that guy in this neighborhood is a kidnapper. And your neighbors would hold you responsible for your civic responsibility. The one that says, oh, they say, oh, look, is he, you know, the man owned too much self. So you become the bad man for doing the right thing. Now, all of that because we have a fractured social foundation. Until we learn that what happens to one person affects every one of us, we cannot deal with corruption. So it's not a milocon. It's not, you know, how it's my turn, you know, and it's turn by turn. It's what affects us, the common patrimony for all of us. And those things must matter. I put it to us, and this is the legal point. I'm closing now. I put it to us, if we don't have such a foundation, then we don't have a basis for demanding accountability, we don't have a basis for demanding transparency, and so on. America did not have a turn, you know, that made it, if people said, no taxation without representation. Now, if you're going to do anything, we must be part of it. Right. We must have a voice in the things that we are doing. So it is that voice that gives us the common good that we're talking about. Until we begin to address that, we cannot even have issues as the basis of our politics. The kinds of issues you think of a higher moral order cannot begin to happen. Everyone knows that roads are not what they should be. Everyone knows that we should not be so poor. Everyone knows that we should be able to address issues of employment. Everyone knows that we should be able to address issues of insecurity. Everyone knows that we should be able to encourage our young people to stay at home rather than migrate. Everyone knows that the staff union of universities should be encouraged not to go on strike as frequently as it does. Everyone knows that, you know, we should not continue to borrow money because, you know, we are mortgaging the future of this country. Everyone knows that climate change will deal with issues and so on. All of these are very important issues, but we are not able to deal with them because we don't see them as common problems. It's only when it does appear that, one, the thing gets to your heart, that's when it becomes a problem. And the rest of the country would pretend it doesn't exist. Or two, there is something that can immediately come out of this process for you in terms of fattening your pocket, that the thing becomes a problem. I'll give this final example and then I'll close. In 1967, when the Civil War broke out, I was a 7-year-old young boy in primary school. And, you know, there were many things we learned in Benin City, you know, where I was domiciled at the time. We were taught, you know, many of you will not know Count von Ronsen. Is that his name? Count von Ronsen, the guy, the Portuguese pilot, you know, who bombed the Benin airport several times. We're told that once you saw a fighter bomb, the fighter jet, you go under the bed, and we learned many things, you know, which still guide us till tomorrow. And we had a war consciousness, even though, you know, the occupation of the Midwest didn't last for so long, but we felt the war. You know, there were times in school our parents had to come to school to quickly get all of us because they said, oh, you know, and so on and so on. Now, in 1976, you know, I got to Ibadan as an undergraduate student and found out, shock of shocks, that those things we experienced in Benin, these guys didn't even know there was a civil war on. Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, it was hard to believe, you know, that those times when we thought our end had come, there were parts of this country that didn't feel like that. This is how what is happening in the Northeast appears so remote to us now. This is how what is happening in the Northwest appears so remote to us. You see, I like my Benin cultural frame. They say, when rain touches this finger, touches the body. Until we learn, that what concerns all of us affects all of us. And therefore, we should have a way of dealing with those things. We're not likely to have the right approach even to elections in our country. We have an opportunity in 2023 to reset the agenda for our country, to make a contribution to the management of our fractured foundations, so that sociology can say that finally we are getting to a point where there's a congruence between our democratic movement and our political cultural movement. But what we see is there is intensified division, fragmentation. We are chasing the shadows. And the man who escaped from the cave, those people who have escaped from the cave are saying to us, come guys, let's leave the cave. And we are saying, just leave us where we are. This is where we want to be. So that another governor would come and he would say, but why? He says he cannot understand the people. They don't know what they want. God forbid. Now I hope we have some understanding of the kinds of things that we need to do. It's citizen engagement, citizen empowerment. The ball is in our court. We must mobilize, and thanks to the Unity House Foundation, these are the kinds of things that we need to bring to our consciousness. We must take our own future in our hands. We must not leave the things to our leaders who take us for granted and even tell us to our faces, that we don't know what we want. Don't we know what we want? You are not able to answer. Do we know what we want? Would you stand for what you want? Are you sure? If 10,000 naira is given today, would you say, I have gotten my money and Emilokon, that's your own turn, and therefore it's good for you? I hope not. So, the issues would come. But we are the foundation upon which those issues can make a difference. I'm sure now you find why I like sociology. Thank you.
And yes, indeed, I think it deserves a standing ovation. Please, let's put our hands together once more for Professor Osagai Emmanuel. And thank you so much, Prof, for correcting me on the pronunciation of the name. Professor Egosa Osagai. Fantastic, and the challenge is on us. Citizen engagement and empowerment. We must take our future in our hands and must not leave it in streamed live. I know it is streamed live on Super FM 93.3. We're live on Super FM. I can also see Ogoni TV here. Ogoni TV is here. And we're streamed on several platforms, several other platforms on the social media. Once again, please permit me to recognize some of the standard bearer of the political parties who are here. A while ago, we saw the Accord standard bearer, Chief Dumolulu Briggs, who walked in a beat and left quite early. And again, I must also recognize Dr. Dawari George, who's been here all morning, the standard bearer for the AA. And permit me to also recognize the standard bearer of the APC, Architect Toyeko. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for joining us. So we'll go straight to the question and answer segment. And we have Professor Emem Ekekwe, who spoke to us earlier and told us about the quality of our democracy. And also now we have Professor Osagai, who's taken us through in the last 50 minutes on what we should expect, what we should do, how we must take our destinies in our hands as the people. Just to ensure that we all have the opportunity to ask questions, I want for you to write your questions on a piece of paper, and because the time it may take passing around the microphone could be a little bit delayed. So if you don't mind, could you just write your questions on a piece of paper? And thereafter, we'll give the governorship standard bearer of the political parties some couple of minutes between 5 and 10 for their goodwill message. So, if we could have the question go round, or should we pass around the microphone? Yes, sir. Fantastic. Prof is suggesting that we have the governorship standard bearer give their goodwill message first. Then, after that, we can answer the questions. So you can go ahead and write your questions now while we welcome the standard bearer of the political parties. And permit me to quickly welcome first Dr. Dawari George of the AA. Let's put our hands together for him, please. Thank you so much.
The guest speaker, moderator, my colleague governorship candidates and all other party candidates who are here, ladies and gentlemen. Let me quickly thank my brother and friend Wenenda Wali for this invite. Sorry, I have a little cold, so I just hope you hear me clearly. And the Unity House Foundation for putting together this conversation from time to time. We really appreciate your commitment to social and political engineering of our state. Ordinarily, I shouldn't, as a political scientist, come to say anything when two of our eminent and celebrated political scientists have spoken. I should just take notes and then go home and read more. But somehow, I'm a bit agitated in my spirit to join the conversation with one or two comments and perhaps also clarification. First, the guest speaker said something about, not knowing everything. I've always believed that one of the things about leadership that helps to connect between leaders and the led is some measure of vulnerability even in leadership, and that a leader does not have to know everything. And so this fear of issue-based campaigns that occasionally makes some of our leaders run away from public engagement because perhaps I may not know this or know that. They should know that there is no single person who puts himself forward for leadership that has the answers to everything. And that when a leader appears to be vulnerable from time to time, it resonates and connects with the people. The people see him as someone who is a bit more real, than fake or artificial. So I think we should also begin to point out that so that we don't scare people that when we talk of issue-based, because we are talking basically about preparation and knowledge, that a leader who comes out to run for an office should know everything. Secondly, sir, when you talked about the people's people being taken for granted, I also aligned with your thoughts on that, particularly because we have started an engagement and probably a conversation that will last even beyond this particular electioneering season, which is the question of whether it is a people's first agenda we are supposed to run at this time of our history or a people's vision agenda. I know that for many political scientists and even sociologists, they will say there are some convergence, similarities between the both of them. But then, basically, I have subscribed more to the people's vision, the people being the means and end of development. The people should define their own development needs and also be made to play a role in finding solutions to those needs. Again, sir, you said something about, a politician who visits a traditional ruler, and the traditional ruler makes a commitment to him to say, I will give the votes of my community to you. And we see that happen oftentimes. For those of us who are politicians, we like it because, what it means is that we get some kind of block votes from that community, even though he may also say to all who come to visit him. It's a normal thing. But the question arises, now consensus, you agree, is also a form of politics. Assuming the community has met, and I've said any aspirant or candidate rather who addresses or speaks to this particular problem of the community, that's the person all of us will vote. Because every politics is local, and the local people are looking for one who has a solution to their problems or their challenges. And in that situation, the man comes and addresses exactly what the people want. And the
time I spoke to people about the future, I lost them. They were completely lost. I couldn't understand why I could not get them to see the future. Your cave analogy is the same. You come out from the light and you run back in and you say, look, I've seen the light. There's a future. Let us talk about the future. And it is lost. It was so bad, sir, that I had to take time out. Went back into Oxford and did a thesis on trying to understand why it is that you are speaking to people about the future and they don't understand. The first professor that I met said to me that when you are speaking to somebody who is not sure that they are going to be alive tomorrow, then there is no way that you are talking to them about next week that they would listen to you. And so he said, change your message and let your message begin to address what worries them now, not what worries them in the future. And so this then became the challenge between vision and hunger. It became the challenge between the future of wealth and poverty of today. It became a problem as to how to manage and address what one politician aptly put as the stomach infrastructure versus the infrastructure of development. This is critical because as we go into our campaign now, we must understand that it is absolutely important that the message of what we are selling is not lost in the haze of hunger, in poverty-driven people, as you are trying to sell what tomorrow brings. And it's a challenge. Even now, as we begin today, our senatorial candidates begin their campaigns today. They're going to be confronted by this reality. For on the one hand, we must convince our people that we are the right ones for their future. But at the same time, they would only want to know, what do you have for me now? It's a problem. I'm not sure that we'll find the answer, but we will try. And that then brings us to the issue of the education, the educated, and the civic duties. Electoral laws, you find a lot of rage and anger that you would have the minimum qualification of being a governor or a president or a House of Rep candidate. Minimum. You start seeing from secondary school, WAEC, and all. And nobody has to be a graduate to lead in the world of today. Yet, in today's world, issue-based campaigns, the thought of intellectual property to produce what is needed for tomorrow, the ability to have intellectual conversation and sitting down strategically to plan for the future are all realities of today. However, the minute you begin to question that, then you fall into an elitist mindset, and then you are blamed of leaving behind a minority. And truly, when the framers of our constitution and the framers of our political process were thinking about this, they were actually doing the right thing. They were actually doing the right thing, because you must not and you should not, by virtue of an education, keep setting people out of political office. That is the right thing. And secondly, it's also correct that the fact that you are educated with a degree does not mean that you are educated. There are many people that have degrees that are not educated at all in many things, and we see them all the time. However, there must be a balance, and there must be a way for you to question the civic, the moral duties of anyone who is going to hold political office, whether they have a degree or not. And so whether you add to it the medical test, psychological test, an IQ, psychiatric test, an IQ test, I don't know, but there must be more to it than just the certificate or lack of a certificate, because rats eat our certificates, certificates disappear, I don't know what. And then I'm led to also look at two other issues that will affect us as we begin to shape what our politics is for the future. And that is what people want to hear versus what people need. And there are two different things, sir. I have found and this was one of the things that I had to question myself about. I said, the popular politicians speak to what people want to hear and not to what people actually need. And you find that when they whip the sentiments of what they want to hear, even though they know it's a lie to what they hear, people tend to buy them. And I said, does it make sense for you to campaign to what they want to hear, knowing that it is dangerous to them, or truly sit down and do the bottom-up approach and look for what they actually need and then present it back to them that this is a need that should be met? It's a question. I've chosen to work on the need rather than what people want to hear, but I also know that it is dangerous because you can lose an election because you are not speaking to what people want to hear, you are not whipping up the sentiments of what they want to hear, even if it is, if I slap you one, you slap me two. Or, anyway, we know our politics. And finally, sir, I touched on impunity versus accountability. If there's something that I have found in this process of politics and what people actually dislike, they dislike impunity. They dislike impunity. They prefer to see accountability. However, there's a dilemma that as a sociologist, I would like you to think about in your process. Even though people, and almost everyone I see,